Today we're going to make a hanging garden for our patio. This is the fourth episode of our patio renovation series, and we're adding in some plants. We went with the easiest system that would give us the most flexibility so we can make these plants work around the different scenarios that we have in mind for this project. We're going to start with these cheap plastic flower pots. These are about $2 each, and we had a bunch of them left over from a previous landscaping project. The plastic folds over to form the top rim, and this is the sturdiest part of the planters. So this is where we're going to drill holes and insert our steel eye bolts. I drilled 3 evenly spaced holes and then used the first planter to line up where I'm going to drill the holes for the next planters. I used nuts and washers to secure the eye bolts. It's important to use washers because that just prevents tear out if the plastic is kind of on the flimsy side. I then screwed on small carabiners that'll allow me to attach chains. For the chains themselves, I try to find a low-cost chain that has large links. The larger the links, the more flexibility you have with attaching carabiners, anchor shackles, or things like that. I cut 3 pieces the same length, and this chain is light enough that I can cut it with just wire cutters. I use the carabiners to attach the chains to the eye bolts, and then I just count up the links and attach the next planter. I prefer using chains over ropes or cables because it allows you to incrementally adjust the flower pots. It's not always easy to predict exactly the right height that you're going to want them, so the modularity of chains here is really handy. I want to use a bunch of different plants, so I staggered the vertical spacing on these pots so that I'll have places for both shorter and taller plants. These flower pots were pretty ugly, so I spray painted them all with Krylon Fusion all-in-one with 5 times stronger adhesion. This is a fantastic spray paint to use on synthetic materials like these plastic flower pots. It has a 5 times greater adhesion rate, comes in a whole bunch of different awesome colors, and shout out to Krylon for sponsoring this entire patio renovation series. I started with matte glacier gray spray paint because that really blends in and matches the existing environment that I've already built. But I do want some pops of color, so I also added in some gloss sunbeam and some satin rolling surf. I have a lot of plants to hang, and it's really difficult to figure out exactly where the best places to hang them are. So what I like to do is install a few heavy-duty hooks or loops and then run a chain laterally in between them. This way I can hang the plants vertically from any one of the links in this horizontal chain. I can add in additional horizontal chains and then even connect in between those chains, giving me all sorts of modular flexibility that allows me to compose with plants in real time. I hung the initial flower pots, stepped back, took a look at them, moved them up and down, added a few more links of chain here or there, and kept adjusting until I felt like I was on the right path. Once we got the heights adjusted, we then added in the plants themselves. These flower pots have drainage holes already in them, but if I'm using pots that don't have drainage holes, I'll just add some gravel in the bottom so that I have a drainage layer so that the roots won't rot out in the soil. I started with some low maintenance succulents to fill out this back row of gray planters. I had to tweak the heights a little bit, and then once I was confident with the placement, I trimmed the excess chain. My goal was to create a hanging garden that surrounds the large patio swing that I made in episode 3. So I kept adding more chains and then occasionally connecting diagonals in between them. Not only do I want variation in color, I also want variation in size. And these larger flower pots were a little bit different. They didn't have the nice rolled over lip that the smaller ones did, but the plastic is quite strong, and after a little testing, I was confident that the carabiners would hold directly through the sides. I started composing the garden by establishing a back wall of consistent plants and then putting splashes of color and larger scaled pots here and there. Having the majority of them along the back wall gives me a lot of options for staging this space. For example, I can move the light and the table that we refinished in episode 2 and have a really nice outdoor workspace surrounded by plants. This all looks great, but I want to go even bigger. So I picked up this really large plastic planter from a thrift store, and as I looked at it, I realized I would need a spreader to make sure that a large scale plant doesn't get damaged by chains pyramiding to a single point. So I took apart an old office chair and used this cross brace as the spreader. It had some screw holes already in it, so I just lined those holes up with the plastic flower pot and drilled through the lip. I then inserted my eye bolts into both the lip of the planter and into the spreader. The spreader was made out of aluminum, which is fantastic because it's both strong and lightweight, and used carabiners to connect chains from the spreader to the eye bolts on the planter. I painted the flower pot, the spreader, the chains, the carabiners, the eye bolts, everything. Krylon Fusion all in one with 5 times stronger adhesion. That's what I like so much about this spray paint. Not only do you not need primer, it works on virtually all surfaces. I've used it on wood, metal, plastics, and even fiberglass, and I've had great success on all surfaces. I often like to keep the plant in the existing pot that it came in, and then I just use mulch to cover the gaps in between the two pots. To hang it, I inserted a couple of eye bolts into the spreader and then ran a short piece of chain between those eye bolts, and now I have a nice loop that I can hang directly to the chain that's attached to the whole mesh of chains that's connected to the ceiling. This swinging lounge chair was already the most comfortable place in our yard, and adding all these plants around it just elevated that experience. We get the nice smell of rosemary, and the occasional hummingbird guest comes to check out the flowers. I need to figure out a good irrigation system because that's the one practical drawback to this setup. Although, on the plus side, this keeps the plants up and away from all our little friendly ground squirrels, which tend to destroy all of our other potted plants that are on the ground. Shout out to Krylon for sponsoring this series. It was a lot of fun, and we actually have been spending quite a bit of time in this new sort of patio area. Look for the links in the description, and also follow us on Instagram. We're going to be doing an IG live soon, and we'll show you how well all these projects have held up in the month or so of use we've gotten out of them. And I don't think we're totally done with this space. I still want to figure out a cool shade structure, and possibly even extend everything to make it a little bit bigger. Alright, thanks for watching. Bye everybody.